when we get shifted, when we get pushed significantly, we tend to veer away from what our normal personality style, our normal communication style, our normal behavior pattern. And we've discovered that the habits that come out when we're really stressed or when we're threatened, when someone gets angry and starts shouting at us and so forth, we revert to one of what we've discovered is there are sort of 5 core styles that people and it's your quote unquote personality under conflict.
I am going to be speaking with Dr. John Eliot. He is an expert in conflict management, and we're going to be talking about your conflict management style. Hi, everybody. I am Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it's never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to lasting love, I have written 3 books. My latest book is Love at Last, True Stories of Couples Who Found Love Later in Life. And I wrote this book to inspire because so many people had given up hope of ever finding love. So if you are single, looking for love, or you're in a relationship and you're just looking for some inspiration, go and get the book. All 3 of my books are available on Amazon for Kindle, paperback, and Audible. Before I bring Dr. John on to the show, I want to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. We are a safe space for you to get support as you journey through this very confusing world of dating. And it is such a great group that many people stay on even after they find a partner. So join us at Your Last First Date. And now for my guest, Dr. John Eliot. He co-wrote a book on the topic of conflict management. He mentors executives and advises professional sports teams, coaches, and athletes on psychological principles for enhancing health, performance, and workplace culture. He has consulted for NASA, the U.S. Olympic Committee, the Mayo Clinic, Sony, and Microsoft. He has held professorial appointments at the University of Virginia, Stanford, Rice, SMU, and the Texas Medical Center, and he's won teaching awards at each. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So as I said to you right before we started, I love talking about conflict resolution, but you are talking about conflict personality styles. I've dealt with communication styles, but not conflict personality styles. So tell us why you decided to focus your research on this type of conflict personality.
Well, my co-author and I, Dr. Jimmy Gwynn, we do a lot of organizational trainings, and we work with sports teams, corporations, school systems, hospitals, and so forth. We've talked plenty about communication and so forth. But what we've discovered over the years is that the tools that help us understand ourselves and each other better, like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and so forth, they're fantastic for communication. And all the work we do to think about our communication styles is fantastic. But we discovered a lot of it applies to when everything's business as normal. When you're having a routine day, all of that is extraordinarily valuable. But then a speed bump comes along. Somebody, cuts you off in traffic, or your boss yells at you, or you spill lunch all over your suit right before you're the most important pitch of your career. Something knocks you off kilter. It presses your buttons. It pisses you off. You stayed up late, and so you're overtired. You're over hungry, right? You're out of homeostasis. And when we get shifted, when we get pushed significantly, we tend to veer away from what our normal personality style, our normal communication style, our normal behavior pattern. And we've discovered that the habits that come out when we're really stressed or when we're threatened, when someone gets angry and starts shouting at us and so forth, we revert to one of what we've discovered is there are sort of 5 core styles that people, and it's your quote unquote personality under conflict. But it's really under stress, or when you're really knocked off center, when you're not the best version of yourself. People when they hear the word conflict and they tune it out, like, no, I don't want. It's a bad thing. Right there, I'm afraid to talk about it. Right. when in fact some of the healthiest thing we can do is talk about this stuff. But we tend to have 5 styles that we go to, and the thing about it is when our buttons get pushed, or when we're really stressed, we're scrambling to meet a deadline. That's when we lose some of our faculties for sort of rational, logical decision making, methodical, think through the process. When we're stressed, we speed up, or we leave out details, or so forth. And so a lot of times we'll shift to one of these, behavioral patterns, and we won't realize we're doing it because we don't have sort of the logical mindset to understand. Oh, normally I would talk to someone this way, but because my button's in push, now I'm talking to them differently. And so we found it's very, very helpful for people to take some time to realize, what habit do they go to when they're really pushed or stretched too thin.
Yeah, and I see this a lot in the dating world as well, that people can function really well out at work most of the time, and they get triggered very differently when they're in a romantic situation, especially if there's a threat of being rejected or somebody misunderstands them. So tell us the 5 conflict styles. What are the styles that you've discovered?
Well, I want to pick up on something you just said, which is fascinating because we do a lot of corporate workshops or programs for professional sports teams, and everybody loves them for how they'll help them as an athlete or a musician or whatever. But invariably, when we finish doing the formal presentation, almost all the questions we get are, that's really great. That's going to help us at work. But when I get in a fight with my spouse, that's what they really want to know. And what's interesting is people can grab the 5 personality styles in some sense a lot easier and quicker when it's at work. They put their professional hat on. We tend to be sometimes less aware of where our sensitivities are in relationships because they're so emotion. And then, conflict happens when emotion spikes. So the 5 styles, sorry, getting back to your question, the 5 styles that people tend to go to. One is what we call an avoider. One is what we call a competitor. One is an analyzer. One is an accommodator, and one's a collaborator. And we use those terms because they're pretty straightforward in what they mean, right? So when if someone's an avoider, when their buttons get pushed, they tend to retreat. They tend to want to delay talking about the situation. And with each one of these styles, we've come up with a lot of nicknames because people think, oh, well, being an avoider is a bad label to have. I don't want to be an avoider. And so they'll take our assessment or they'll do a workshop and they'll realize that, oh, I'm an avoider. And but I don't want to be an avoider. That sounds bad, right? And so we say, well, it's more like being a golfer. If you're on the 18th green, making a putt to try and win the Masters, what a golfer's in that situation. That is a high leverage situation, high stress situation. What do they tend to do? They put on their blinders. They get focused very, very narrowly on the ball and the path and the hole, and they let everything else go, right? They take their time. They line up their putt. They go to one side. They go to the other side. They blocked out the crowd. They got their information from the caddy, but then they block out the caddy. Caddy goes and leaves the green, right? They get individualistic, very narrow focus, very methodical on the process of what they're doing. So it's not that avoiders run away from conflict. It's that when they encounter conflict, they handle it like a golfer does trying to win a tournament, which is very individual, narrow focus. And that skill set sometimes can be very, very helpful. And then obviously, with the different partners you have, different teammates, different spouses, it can be a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, we have the avoidant personality in attachment styles. And so when I think of avoider, I think of people who shut down around conflict and who would rather not talk about it ever. And, well, actually, this is what I want, but I'm so scared to ask for it that I will keep it in until I can't take it anymore. Is that what would come under the avoider category too?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to note that every one of these 5 styles has strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And so, you're really drilling right into the weakness, which is put off talking about it, right? I'll get to that later. I would rather not deal with it right now. I've got more important things to do. And so avoiders, their strength is in prioritizing. And so if it's a small issue, then it doesn't really matter how it comes out. then they won't make a big deal of it because they'll prioritize, they'll let somebody else handle it, and it'll take care of itself. And so they're a real strength for those types of little minor spats and so forth, where it's easy for them to just empower the other person and let them take charge, so then they can go focus on what's more important. But they really, their weakness, they struggle on big conflict that needs some addressing in the short term. That's when it's not a good match.
Yeah. When I'm working with somebody, I'll tell them to speak out loud about needing more time. Like, because often when something comes at us, we get so triggered, and we'll talk about triggers in a little bit, but we get so triggered that we can't respond. Our brains are flooded. We just don't have the ability to respond in the moment. And it's something I had to learn to do with my kids. I'm too angry right now, and I don't want to say anything I'll regret. So I'm going to take a time out, and I'm going to come back in 15 minutes after I've cooled down. So it's also being responsible with your emotions and not just being reactive. So sometimes being an avoider can also mean taking that time to process, I'm imagining.
That's a really key point, because half of the benefit of this is getting an understanding of what your habits tend to be. And then obviously really important is understanding the habits of your partner, your teammate, and so forth. And so, if you're in a relationship with an avoider, they need a minute. And even though you want to tackle something, they say you're not an avoider, you're a different style. You want to tackle something right away. You want to bring something up. Um, you know, the conversation is going to be much more productive if you give them a second.
All right. So competitor, tell us about that.
Yeah, so the competitor, the sports analogy is the linebacker in football, right? The competitor wants to go, go, go. They want to tackle things now. They want to fix things. And they don't care so much about how things get fixed. They just want them fixed right away. So they can come across as very aggressive, like a linebacker blitzing a quarterback, going all out, right? The misassumption is that competitors are just aggressive, egomaniacs that always want their way and are very controlling. When what they want is they want problems fixed, and they want to make progress. They want to see that things are moving forward, and they want things to move forward now, and they want to tackle the big things, and tackle the big things first. With the different styles we talk about, when you're interacting with them under pressure, should you play momentum or should you play dominoes? And playing dominoes is you tackle the big issue first and knock it over, and the small ones fall. Playing momentum is get a small little win, tackle a small thing, and slowly work up to the big thing. Well, competitors want to play dominoes. They want to tackle the biggest domino in the room. And so in situations that are time sensitive, in situations where there's a challenge because nobody's really stepping up, they'll step up. And so in those situations, they have a real strength. In things that you need to take longer to process, you need to gather more data. It's a long-term problem to solve. They're going to struggle. They're going to have weakness, and they're going to need to trust that their teammate needs to take the helm.
There's a plus and a weak side and a strength side to each of these. And there can be, right. So that, having a leader who is a competitor could be a great thing because they know how to get right to the heart of the matter. But there are times, like you said, where you really need more time. And then the ability to trust a team is also hard for a lot of people. So the competitor can be a good person to have on your team, and can also be somebody who can just kind of be like a hurricane and take over and be too much.
Exactly. If you're in an emergency, let's say your child got a concussion, is unconscious, you got to get to the emergency room. You want a competitor. You want your spouse to be a competitor. If you're building your dream house, and it's a 2-year project to get everything right and to go over the details and make sure, right, you're thinking of everything. You don't want a competitor planning that project because they're going to want to have the house built this week.
That's interesting because I have a client who's an interior designer, and she deals with a lot of difficult couples who one of the spouses is more of a competitor. They come in going, I want this done, now. I want this budget. I want to do it for as little money as possible. And she's coming in saying, look, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years. this is my field and I'm bringing you the best materials and all the right knowledge. You need to trust me, but it's hard for them to let go.
So what you need to do with competitors in that situation, because they want to see that progress is made. They want to make, let's go. You need to find something where you can give them a win. Where what of this project can we do quickly, and then get them focused on that little piece, because that'll make them happy. Oh, this is going to get done. It's going to get done right away, and they'll focus on that, and then you can slow everything else down to the proper pace.
That's a great idea. And I think also just even acknowledging somebody's desire for something to happen, instead of saying you're wrong, this
Absolutely.
isn't how it's done, right?
Absolutely. Competitors need to feel like you're making progress. And a lot of times you can satisfy that and bring their emotion back down if you just acknowledge that their need, just like you said.
Yeah. All right. Great. So, analyzer.
Yeah, so an analyzer is what we call like a GM in sports. Today's general managers that are putting teams together, they love data and they love analytics and they like looking at statistics. Analyzers, when they're pushed or they're pressed, their buttons are pushed. They want to try and see all sides. They want to get all the data. They want to see 6 different proposals. They want to make sure no stone is unturned, and they really want to roll their sleeves and dig into that, which is when you have a really complex problem with 16 variables, you want an analyzer on your team. But if it's a more clear cut, simpler, you don't. They're going to really slow things down, and they're very time wise. They're very inefficient.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, I'm thinking of my sister who can bring so many details to a situation. And sometimes it's just too much. It's like, we don't need to know all these things right now. And I think I'm much more of I'm not sure what I am yet. I'll let you know at the end of this. But I like to get to the heart of the matter. I think I'm more of a competitor. I react well in an emergency. I don't get bogged down. I don't get emotionally charged that easily. But my sister will be like, have you thought of this and this and this? And I'm like, no, these things are not important now. But it's also a great skill because she was a teacher and she brought all of this beautiful knowledge and attention to detail to her classes.
Absolutely. Yeah. The competitor will have a solution that works well. And then the analyzer will say, well, actually, let's look at this one other way to tackle it, or well, before we do that, let's test this and test that, and it'll infuriate a competitor, like, no, this is a perfectly good enough solution. And so again, each has strengths and weaknesses, and the real value is understand when one style should take the lead versus another, and which components of a conflict or of a problem you're trying to solve, each different style is best fit handling. Because if an
Yeah.
analyzer can work on gathering crucial information while a competitor is starting to put the building blocks in place, sometimes they make great teammates.
Yeah, I'd imagine that just knowing, like, this is me, this is them, here's how we can work together, here's why I get triggered when you say this, and it would help you to resolve conflict much easier. All
Exactly.
right, so number 4, accommodator.
Yeah. So the accommodator is like a point guard in basketball. The accommodator is distributes the ball, makes sure everybody gets the ball passed. Right. Accommodators are great leaders in that they care about all of their teammates getting what they need. They're very selfless. And they're willing to shoulder the load for the whole team. They're like Sherpas climbing Mount Everest. They'll carry all the packs. They'll do all the work so that somebody else can get the credit and be the first to plant the flag on top of the mountain. And they love that. They love seeing their teammates and their spouses and their friends thrive and succeed. And they love doing the little things to help them get there. So they'll put their head down and they'll go to work. And when conflict comes up, they're very much, hey, whatever you need, right? Go for it. I'll support you. The challenge with the point guards is they're willing to do a whole lot of work, and they're willing to do a whole lot of work without getting credit. But privately, they need to be acknowledged. Privately, they need to be appreciated for all the sacrifices that they're making. And so, if you have a point guard on your team and you're very good at acknowledging their contributions, and you're very thankful for what they do, they will tirelessly, work to help you.
I've known quite a few accommodators. We call them the victim martyr kind of personality,
Mm-hmm.
where they're just, I'm totally selfless, but nobody's totally selfless, and I think everybody needs
Right.
some acknowledgement, but there are people who are aware of everybody's behavior, and they're very sensitive to everyone's needs. And I would imagine that it'd be great to have someone like that on your team, but just as you said, to be aware that we also need to acknowledge their contribution.
Yeah, because accommodators, when something bothers them, they tend to bury it. Right? Hey, look, I'm here to serve the team. It's not about me, and so this thing that bothers me, I'll just bury it. I'll just bury it, and they keep doing that until they snap, until they can't take it anymore. And so what you need to do is you need to be aware of the little things that bother them, because they usually won't say something about it. And if you can figure out what little things bother them, so you can lend them a helping hand or acknowledge, hey, that, I really appreciate that, in spite of that, you did this, then it'll help them from getting it all bottled up.
Yeah, it's just having that knowledge is so helpful to be able to understand somebody's personality so that there is less conflict. It's
Definitely.
such an interesting thing. People avoid conflict like it's a plague, and in the dating world, you see often in an online profile, even people will say no drama, no conflict. They write it in there because they've had situations where there was high conflict. Well, first of all, know what your style is and know what your contribution is. And it's not about avoiding conflict, like you say. It's about understanding conflict, because when we avoid it, we actually dismiss important conversations, and we
Right.
don't know how to get along with people, right? So it's important.
Yeah, because one of the sort of pieces of magic of disagreements and so forth, is it provides an opportunity for dialogue. It provides an opportunity for us to improve our communication skill, and at the end of the day, brings people closer. You see sports teams that go through rough patches. They take some losses, and it brings them tighter together because they use the loss to learn more about each other and to communicate more openly and to do a little more hugging in the locker room, and then they're tighter. So the people that put those profiles, no drama, they're either an avoider, or they don't know what they are. They haven't taken the time to know their style. They don't want to be bothered learning other people's style, and that's a red flag.
Oh, yeah.
There to some conflict is healthy because it's a means to learn about one another, and it's a mean to find where your differing strengths and weaknesses can actually work together. You have this strength, I have this strength, and so in these sorts of difficult situations, boy, we're going to be a match made in heaven because we're, have two separate strengths that we both need, and we can share them.
Yeah, and you don't want to all be the same, because
That's right.
I think people work better when they complement each other in that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the collaborator is the final of the five. Tell us about that.
Yeah. The collaborator, when pushed or stressed, is very relationship focused. They'll very quickly put aside, work and anything that they're to focus on the relationship. And so they're very charismatic. They're very effusive. They want to talk everything through. They make good listeners. But they tend to take their eye off the ball in terms of the work that needs to be done, or the problem that needs to be solved, or the goal that you're trying to achieve, because they get so focused on the relationship. And am I okay with so and so? Are they okay with me? And do we need to talk it through more? And so they're great, in social situations. But they can blur the boundary. They can blur the professional, personal boundaries, and they can get too focused on the relationship and forget. Oh, by the way, we still need to get the groceries that you've been saying you're going to get for weeks on end. The interesting thing about a collaborator, is they're so focused on taking care of relationships, that they tend to not reveal a lot about themselves, because they're so busy asking everybody else, well, what do you think? And what do you feel? And you tell me about this. That if you're careful, collaborators will learn a lot about you, but they won't leave a lot of opportunity for you to learn about them. And so you've got to do the work to get them to open up. They tend to play things close to the vest. And sometimes they can end up being very manipulative because they're so focused on the relationship, they learn your hot buttons and then use them, right? And ends don't justify the means. And so collaborators are interesting because they're great at relationships, but at the same time, they communication can end up being one directional, and you really got to work to get them involved in talking and sharing as much as they're asking you to share.
That's interesting. So they're more interested in the relationship with the other person, but not revealing about themselves.
Yep. And they're great at teamwork. They're terrible at solo projects. When you have something comes up and you need somebody, you're like, I just need you to go take care of this, right? And we don't need to make a big deal of it. Just go get it done. They're not the person you want to, divide and conquer with because they want to be interacting all the time.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. Let's talk a little bit more about the home and work differences, because we just started to touch on that, but you were saying something like at work, it can be easier to be rational and to use that part of your brain. When it comes to interpersonal relationships, our conflict styles can be a little bit different. So tell us a little bit more about how that pans out.
A lot of times we'll see people, we call these 5 styles the go-to style, right? When your buttons get pushed or when you're having a really bad day, what habit do you go to? We see a lot of people have a different go-to at work and at home. For example, there'll be a competitor at work, and then there'll be an accommodator at home. And one of the reasons is the mission's different. At work, there's quarterly numbers that need to be hit. There are deliverables, and people tend to be able to compartmentalize a little bit better, and they focus on the X's O's a little more. And so sometimes it's easier for them to keep their emotion from spiking on certain things, or at work they can put a project aside and go work on something else, or they can go to lunch, and they can keep their colleagues at arm's distance. The exception to this is the collaborator. The collaborator will be very chummy with all of their coworkers, but the other styles can be less personally involved with their coworkers. And so emotions doesn't spike for some of these things as much. Whereas at home, right, the mission is the relationship. The mission, right, is caring for your family. And so the lines get blurred a whole lot more. And so sometimes it's very common for people to have 2 different styles work at home because, well, at work, I have this style because we're trying to launch a new product. At home, I have the style because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what curtains we put up. It matters that, our family is good.
Yeah. And I imagine also what matters is the conflict style of your partner. So at work,
Yes.
you're dealing with different styles than you might be at home. And maybe your kids also are very different in how they interact with you if you have children. So, it can be complicated. I know in my case, I have 3 children and they all have very different personalities, and I speak differently to each one of them because of that. And I think often we think it's a one size fits all. We can just treat everybody the same and they'll all understand us. And something that I heard a long time ago is that we need to communicate in the way that the other person needs to hear, not the way that we would have our go-to. What do you think about that?
That's absolutely right. And at home, very rarely is the case that, the effective strategy is to just move to something else, jump in your car and go do something else. Because, those relationships, you want those relationships 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And that matters. Versus at work, there's always the opportunity to get a new job, switch project teams, switch to a different department. The ability to be more custom in who your team is and switch teams is more, in a lot of cases, is much more flexible at work. Where at home, this is the team you picked, and you need to invest in that team and invest in their styles, have them invest in your style, and you're in it to win it. There's no right.
Yeah.
And so the consequences are much more important at home versus at work. There are different fixes.
It's very true. Let's talk about triggers and why it's so important to understand our triggers, and also how can people identify what triggers them.
Yeah, so knowing your hot buttons is crucial. To know when a situation is coming at you that may trigger you, and so you can be a little more predictive in which situations you're more likely to get away from being yourself. And then when you know what triggers you, then you know which of these habits you're going to go to. Because if you happen to be a competitor, it doesn't mean you're just competitive at everything. This particular style means you get competitive and you get task focused and you get deadline focused when you're triggered. Right. That's the key to these styles. Is these styles are the habits you go to when you're triggered. So if you don't know when you're triggered, you don't know when these habits are going to pop up.
You know your hot buttons, you know, okay, this is going to trigger me. So now I can prepare myself a little better. I'm not like a deer in the headlights. You know, this is something I know, like this is something I need to be prepared for. And I think a lot of people will put themselves into situations without even knowing that this is my hot button. And it's really
Right.
hard to be around people like that. People who also don't even, it could be something as simple as they haven't eaten all day, or they haven't gotten enough sleep and they're taking it out on you, or they're stressed out because their project isn't done. And so now it's your fault, right? So it's not your fault. And and so knowing how to manage. So if you can give like one tool for how to manage a trigger when you know like it's something's happening and you've got that hot button happening.
The first step, right? Once you're triggered, your emotion spikes, and you lose sort of your day to day facility to think through a project or a problem or a challenge, rationally, methodically, and so forth. So early on in the process, if not the first step, is to do something that'll bring your emotion level back down. And so for some people, it's taking a beat. For some people, it's finding for the momentum players. It's finding one little thing that you can do to at least feel like you're going in the direction or getting the ship back, heading the right way. And so for each one of these styles, know do you need to take a breather? Do you need to be heard? Do you need to listen? Do you need to have some little mark of progress or do something just tiny, just to the old adage of take action. In basketball, sometimes players will struggle on defense, and they get in a slump. And some of the best advice when they're in a slump and they're just they keep making mistakes is hey, when the game gets tough, just move your feet. Just move your feet. And once you get moving, right, then they stop freezing and choking, right. And so for some people, it's knowing I just got to do a little something. It doesn't need to be big. And so any one of those strategies. So you know what your triggers are, you know what your style is, and say, okay, well, what is it that brings emotion down? And if you need to be heard, then your partners need to know, hey, when you're triggered, this is the most important thing. It'll lower emotion, and then hey, this will be much easier to handle. Or you need to share. You need to take a minute, right? And so vital to do something to lower your emotion, but also vital to know when your partner or your teammate or your best friend, you know what their triggers are too. And when you know their triggers, you know what style is going to come, and then well, what do they need? Do they need a minute? Do they need to be heard? Do they need to take action?
Yeah, very good advice. I mean, I think when we can get from being stuck and frozen to moving in some way, it really is helpful. I mean, People get stuck in anxiety, they get stuck in sadness, they get stuck people get ghosted in dating where somebody has rejected them. It's very easy to just be like so shocked that you don't do anything. And then if you just know, like, just take a walk around the block, like, just take a breath, call a friend, be heard, feel seen, because when you're ghosted, you're not seen, So knowing where to turn, whether it's at work or through, any of your relationships, I think it's great advice to take action.
When we get away from homeostasis,
Yeah.
we can get triggered by everything. And to know when you haven't had enough sleep, when you haven't had enough to, you're dehydrated, when you're hungry, so you're overtired and hungry and so forth, then that will get you out of right your best self. And when you're in that type of state, everything can trigger you. And then all of this gets confusing, gets jumbled. And so the important thing is to realize, when things aren't going right, when something blows up, when there's a challenge, and your emotion spikes, it's always important to say, is it spiking because I'm away from homeostasis? I haven't eaten, I haven't slept, I haven't drank, right? And that's the piece. You got to tackle that first. And then you can come back to this. And if it's none of those, then okay, then which of my go-to styles does it work here?
Yeah, it's so important to just be aware of yourself. Like, what is going on for me? And often it's those basic core physical needs that we haven't attended to. And once we identify, we'll know which way to turn rather than feeling helpless and out of control, which is what happens when we're out of homeostasis.
So many arguments between couples happen right before dinner. Everybody's
Mm.
been working all day, they've been busy or whatever, and it's getting close to dinner time, and people are hungry. And then you start talking about something, and next thing you know, you're sideways, because you're tired, or because you're hungry, or both. And then if okay, it's right before dinner time, right? Emotions we're all gonna be triggered and so forth, and so my spouse is gonna probably do this right before dinner. I'm gonna probably do this right before dinner. Then you know what to look out for until you're able to sit down and refill the tank.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you bring up. And it reminds me of, I had a guest once who was part of a men's group, and he would call one of his buddies on the way home from work, and he would kind of offload the day so that he wouldn't bring it into the house. And I love that because that's what we do. We don't self-regulate. We don't know how to get rid of the stress. And people do this in dating too. They'll come after a full day of work. They haven't taken the time to de-stress after work. And so you don't want to dump that on somebody else. And, there's so many wonderful ways that we can attune to the other person when we get into the house, even just a hug and just attuning to your heartbeat is a beautiful way to just calm each other's nervous system and then get food into your mouth because you're both hungry.
Such a great point. I've had a number of clients, because we borrow sports analogies all the time. I have a number of clients that have followed that same advice that you're giving in that, but from the frame of reference of having a pre-performance routine, right? So every great athlete, before they go on the court or the field, before they take the ice for their skating performance or whatever, they have a pre-performance routine. They have something they go through that gets them in the mindset, that gets them in the moment, gets them mindful of, okay, here's what's important. And sometimes it's meditative, sometimes it's stretching, sometimes it's breathing, right? And for some of them, they have a long pre-performance routine. Lee Smith, the famous world the Hall of Fame pitcher, used to start getting. He was a reliever, and he would always come in the ninth inning. Well, he'd start getting warmed up in the third inning, and his routine was long. But there's some people it's only a couple of minutes. It's just breathe through the belly, imagine, right, the great thing that I'm looking forward to, right, and that pre-performance routine is crucial when you're leaving home and going to work, and even more crucial when you're leaving work and go home. And so I've had a number of clients that on their way home, whether they stop at a coffee shop or the pull off on the road where there's a nice view, or when they come in the driveway and say, okay, now it's my pre-performance routine for being a great mom or a great dad or a great husband or a great partner. Here's my little routine that gets me in that space because I'm about to walk in the house and I want to be a champion at home for my family. And here's what champions do. They have this routine. And when we put in that, at least, for a lot of folks that like sports analogies, like, oh, I get it. And then it's a little bit of fun, but then it does exactly what you're talking about. It accomplishes, getting away from all of the junk at work and then be present at home.
Yeah, that's interesting with the sports analogy. Yeah, I think in any case, when you're transitioning from one state to another, you have to be conscious of what you're doing and how to get there. My final question is, what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date? And, I know that you're not a dating expert, but in terms of communication, maybe even this pre-date performance, whatever it is, I would love to hear.
The fundamental needs that all human beings share in common, right? We have a need to be heard, right? We have a need to be cared for. We have a need to feel like our life has meaning and purpose, right? We need to be of value. We all share that. It doesn't matter, what background we come from, where we grew up, how much money we have. That never goes away. You never satisfy those needs. That's a lifelong. It's what makes us human. And so when you're thinking about being with the person that you're meant to be with for the rest of your life and so forth, understand that whole equation is you helping them with that and them helping you with that, doing that for you, and two teammates satisfying those basic fundamental sort of human functions. And if you go into it, say that's what it's all about. And so I want to understand the purpose and the meaning and the value of this person, and you're not just listening because it's an important thing to do when on a dinner date, to show that you can listen, and to let them talk. It's know that you honestly actually are really really interested, in what their meaning and their purposes and how they define themselves and so forth, and we all share that in common, and that's what makes us. We're a social species. We're not designed to be an individual. We're designed to work in groups and pairs and so forth, and so we accomplish this life actualization together, and that's what great teammates do. They're partners in that path of seeking meaning and purpose and feeling fulfilled. And the way that I look at it is a great relationship is that's what counts. That's what it's all about. All the other stuff is just adventures along the way. And sort of they keep your eye on the prize in terms of this is what, if we're going to be teammates, this is what we're teammates about, this life actualization experience. And if we can help each other in that grand adventure, then anything else that comes up, disagreements and differences of opinion and so forth, it's just part of the journey. And we have the tools to navigate all those things, because at the end of the day, I really care about you having purpose and vice versa, and we're shepherding each other through that in the midst of anything that this world throws at us.
Teammates. And I really like that you bring in the values and the core needs that we all have. And you speak of this as partnership, and that's really the ideal. I think a lot of people get into relationships where there's power differences, where the other person is not really listening or doesn't really care about your growth, only about their own. And you're looking for somebody who's going to value you as much as you value them. So that's really good advice, whether you're a teammate at work or a teammate in the romantic world. Really, really great tips today, John. I would love for you to share a link where people can find you. I know you have this new book.
It's How to Get Along with Anyone. We're very blessed that Simon and Schuster is putting it out. And you can go to the conflict docs, conflictdocs.com, the conflictdocs.com. That's where we have other resources where you can link to take the assessment to find out your style, or get together at a cocktail party with your friends and learn everybody else's styles. And there are other resources there, but it also has a link. We're big supporters of indie bookstores. So it's got lots of indie bookstores around the country that it'll link you to, so you can order from the mom and pop shops that share great literature with everybody.
All right. I love the title, How to Get Along with Anyone, because I think a lot of people think, well, I get along with people who are easy, but the hard people, forget it. I don't want to have anything to do with them. And you've given us so many great resources for how to understand ourselves and others, which is really crucial for emotional intelligence and for being able to be successful in all aspects of life. So thank you so much, John, for coming on today. I know your co-author couldn't make it, but I wish you the best of luck in the success of this book and in all your work.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. The work you do is fantastic, and so you making some time for us, it means the world. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And thanks everybody for listening today. If you love our show, please give us a high rating on Apple Podcasts, share it with your friends. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.